Um, at the center of Marxism, center of Marx's work, and certainly I think at the center of this particular work, wrote with Engels, is a theory of history. And that theory of history is usually called historical materialism. And it is a very grand thesis about history and how it gives a framework for how one can understand history, and especially the subject of historical change. The idea that economic practices and economic relations are the foundation of society, and as they change and move, then the rest of society, political, cultural, and everything else, move along with it and move because of it. That's a big thesis, a very ambitious, grand thesis for understanding history, and it's been written about and thought about endlessly in the past 150 years. And it's really not something that's proper to go into in any depth in a business ethics context. I don't really think that would be very helpful. But then again, if we look at this work, and I am asking you to read this work, at least the first two sections of the Communist Manifesto, and think about it, keep it in mind. And if we read it, we come across the first line of section 1, where it says, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. If we're going to read this, we have to sort of make sense of what is he saying, what are they saying about history. What does this mean, that history is the history of class struggles? Well, Marx, like the other two authors we've looked at so far, is trying to interpret the modern world. Is trying to understand the world that he lives in. And amongst all three of these authors, there's a recognition that there's something distinctive about the modern. And Adam Smith was trying to understand that, and he thought that to a certain degree he found the key in division of labor as really the thing that you had to look at if you wanted to understand the kind of changes that were happening in the world. Tawney was trying to understand what the sort of cultural changes were, changes in thought about ethics and religion and social relations that characterized change into the modern world. Marx and Engels are trying to understand the modern world, especially in its economic aspect. And what they're doing is situating the changes that produced our modern world, a modern industrial, capitalist, democratic or semi-democratic societies, and situating that within a general framework for understanding history in terms of class struggle. He continues, or they continue, freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, fieldmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes, which is to say, in one respect, just, classes have been struggling forever, and that's just the way that societies are. Maybe it's not the way that society will be after the revolution, the great promise of communism, a classless society in which the class struggle comes to an end, and one might say, therefore, history comes to an end, but that's, again, another topic. But society should be understood, I guess, any society, in history or now, in its fundamental aspect, is a struggle between classes. We look for classes, what classes are struggling? Who's he talking about, really, and what are they struggling over? Those are very deep questions we have to, or basic questions we have to ask ourselves. Well, we look at Tawney's reading, and the notion of classes in the Middle Ages, we get a certain notion of things, classes, and of course the classes are different. The whole idea here, he mentions all sorts of different classes of the past, is that social classes change along with revolutionary developments in economics, technology, production. And also, if we think about Tawney's description of how the Middle Ages thought of themselves, how these people of the past thought of their own societies, we get a very different view than Marx's view. The whole idea of the social organism is the classes work together to achieve a common end, cooperation, and harmony. The whole idea of the social organism is that the social classes are like parts of the body. They are related to each other, they have a commonality, and they have different functions, but they have the same overall goal. which is the health and flourishing of the body as a whole, or the social body as a whole. Of course, to see things in terms of class struggle is to have a very different view of the relations between classes. The relations between classes in the Marx Engels view are always antagonistic. The struggle is a fight, a mortal combat between classes which have very different interests. The view of the Middle Ages between the relation between the classes was paternalistic. The aristocrats were like the parents, and the peasants were like the children. And the parents were in charge of the children, but for the children's own good. That is paternalism, right? The notion that some people have to be taken care of. But taken care of, right? Not exploited. And the Marx Engels idea is that any sort of claim like that is complete nonsense. It's a cover for the reality of the situation. The whole idea of classes is based upon exploitation of labor, the labor of one class enriching another. And the two classes we're talking about here are the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. You know, it's interesting to look into the history of those terms. The bourgeoisie in the Middle Ages were just the people who lived in the towns, or the root meaning of the word, townspeople, and they were different because they lived in towns. My understanding of the origin of the word proletarian is that it was the way that the aristocratic Romans referred to the urban poor of Rome as the people who just were prolific, in the sense that they reproduced, because they couldn't think of anything else that these people did. And that notion of the urban poor is retained in the modern term proletariat, but the modern proletariat, described in the Communist Manifesto, they do stuff, you know, they work. They're poor and starving and oppressed, but they work, and that's the whole basis of the economy, is their work. So we have this struggle, this simplified struggle between the owners, the people who have capital, and the workers, the people who need to go to those people for wages, to work, to sell their labor in exchange for wages. It's this relationship between the owner, the capitalist, whose whole sort of mode of existence is creating products, selling them at a profit, and then using that profit to grow their capital, and the propertyless wage earner who basically lives the same sort of subsistence life that the medieval peasant did, but in Marx's opinion, view of it much worse. The whole thing in modern economies is about this relation between these two classes and their struggle. Well, who are these classes, and where did they come from, and what is what is their role in modern societies? You know, there's no doubt that from a Marxist point of view, the bourgeoisie is being condemned. They are the exploiters. They are the haves who exploit the have-nots. But there are parts of the first section of the Communist Manifesto that are, in a way, sort of praises of the class, bourgeois class. They have created something. And this, in a way, that's the key to the whole thing. And here we'll see a deep connection between Marx and Adam Smith. If you look a little bit into the first section of the Communist Manifesto, you see that the bourgeoisie has accomplished things, has moved the world forward in ways that Marx and Engels think are positive. He says, the bourgeoisie has played a most revolutionary role in history. The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his, quote, natural superiors, unquote. It has left no other bond between man and man than naked self-interest and callous cash payment. Now, this is, of course, a much more dramatic and ruthless picture being painted than something like what Adam Smith is getting at in The Invisible Hand. But what are Marx and Engels saying there is that the bourgeoisie have done us all a favor by throwing off the illusions of the Middle Ages, that whole paternalistic nonsense of the aristocrats and the clergy taking care of the peasants, and you are like the hands and I am like the head, but we all blah, blah, blah. No, it's about money. It's about exploitation. You show up at a factory. Look, here's the deal. For your labor, you get these wages. Take it or leave it. I don't care about you. And you don't care about me. And it's okay because we're all producing our, or we're all pursuing our self-interest. And the notion that all that really matters between individual human beings is cash relations, the money relation, and that's all that human beings mean to each other. If that's the nature of modern capitalist society, Marx and Engels say, good, now we know the truth of the matter. The whole thing is based upon exploitation. So that's one great accomplishment of bourgeoisie, right? To show that modern business is just ruthless exploitation. It's just naked self-interest. It's, yes, it is, Smith was right. It's about individuals pursuing their self-interest and nothing else. You can also see that the great accomplishment of the bourgeoisie is very close to what Smith was getting at in his description of and praise of the division of labor. But farther again, in this description of the rise of the bourgeoisie, he says, the bourgeoisie, during its rule of scarce 100 years, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. What earlier century had even a presentiment that such productive forces slumbered in the lap of social labor? Now, if we think of division of labor, it is social labor, it's cooperative labor, and the great accomplishment, you might say, of the bourgeoisie from the Marxist point of view is that they're the ones that discovered that how much more productive labor would be when it is socialized in the sense of cooperative division of labor. So great accomplishments on the part of the bourgeoisie. But at the same time, what is the real situation? Wage laborers are really nothing more than wage slaves. The whole point of the wage labor situation is somebody's labor is bought because it's a source of value and increases value, increases capital for whoever has the capital. And so he says a little bit later on, in proportion as the bourgeoisie, that is capital, is developed, in the same proportion as the proletariat, the modern working class, developed, a class of laborers who live only so long as they find work, and who find work only so long as their labor increases capital. These laborers, who must sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity, like every other article of commerce. This is a big, you might say, ethical element of Marxism, and that is that in capitalism, people are treated like things, and things are treated like people. And as we'll see, that's a big part of the ethical critique of capitalism, is that what matters in capitalism is capital. People are for the sake of growing capital, and therefore people are used like things. They're used instrumentally, and treated like person is capital. Like capital has a value in itself, like a person. And so the world, from the Marxist point of view, the world of capitalist business is the world turned upside down. It's a world in which people are treated like things and things are treated like people. Someone can see from this point of view that the notion, of, again, of an ethical business or business ethics is laughable because the whole system is unethical. It can't be safe. So what is the basis of this system? We'll look at it and we'll do one more talk on this. No need to go into too much detail. The base of the system, of course, is private property. From the communist point of view, that's what needs to be destroyed in order to create a new system.